Welcome to another episode of the Overcome University podcast. I'm your host, Michael Allison. Today's guest is Dre Baldwin, aka Dre All Day, CEO of Working on Your Game. He's a 9-year pro athlete, has written over 33 books, and he's a 4-time TEDx speaker. Hey, Dre, welcome to the show, brother.
I'm excited to be here, Michael. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you so much for being here and willing to come on and share your story and how you're overcoming adversity and helping leading people in this day and age where there's so much trial, so much adversity, and people need to be resilient, man. So thank you for coming on, brother.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Man, let's dive into it, man. So you're a 9-year pro athlete, man. And now you're in the entrepreneur space, working with business owners and helping them lead organizations. Can you tell us how did you make that transition and what even encapsulated you to even start going that route?
Sure. So that started with when I started my pro basketball career, which was in 2005, coming out of a Division III college. I had to kind of sell myself and kind of hustle in order just to get my chance to play ball, period. So when I got on, at the same time, I had started putting videos on this brand new website called YouTube because the event, I had to go to this event. That was like a job fair for athletes. They call them exposure camps. So I had to go to one of those just to get myself seen because I played D3 and the scouts don't go looking at D3 players. So I had to go to the exposure camp so I could prove myself against pro level guys. And the footage from that camp was on this thing called a VHS tape. You remember those? So I took the VHS tape, Michael, and I got that put on a data CD. And that's why I put the video on YouTube because I just wanted somewhere to keep the video. And then I noticed that people were finding that video like 6 months later, and they were just asking me questions. And I realized that these people were coming to the internet to learn basketball because now they can go on the internet and get information. Whereas, back in the day, our generation or before that, if you didn't know a person personally, you just didn't have the information. So I would put videos on YouTube sporadically for a couple of years, and I was starting to build up a nice little audience. And I wasn't even doing it seriously because, again, there wasn't any money to be made from doing that. But then around 2009, so it's a few years into my career, and I played in a bunch of different places by this point. But the way overseas basketball is, sometimes the phone's not ringing. You're a free agent, and you don't know when that next call is coming. So that's where I was at. Phone wasn't ringing, and I was at home. So Google had just purchased YouTube. I just finished reading The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, and I realized that I had an audience on the internet, and I realized now there's a way that maybe I could possibly monetize this. I could make some money off this. So that's when I started creating my own products. And I also started talking about the mindset aspect of sports because a lot of ball players who were following me on YouTube at the time, Michael, they were learning the skill stuff, like how to dribble, how to shoot, and how to jump higher to dunk. But they weren't able to apply it in the games the way that they wanted to. So they started asking me more questions just about the mental aspect of it, because a lot of them realized that they had the physical tools, but not the mental tools. And also because of my background, barely played in high school, walked on in college, but I still made it pro. What was the mindset of this guy, this random guy on the internet who's putting all this content out, again, way before it was normal to put out content. So I started talking about things like discipline and confidence and mental toughness and personal initiative. And in doing that, a bunch of the ball players said, well, Dre, we really appreciate this stuff. This is even more useful for me than the drills and the dribbling and the dunking. And people who didn't play ball, they also heard those messages because what I was doing was, at this point, I was starting to put out videos every day. Mm-hmm. So I was starting in 2009, I started putting videos on YouTube every single day. And again, this is not the time of put content on the internet every day. That wasn't the thing. And I started calling these mindset pieces. This is the only thing I was doing that was not basketball. I started calling them the weekly motivation. So every Monday I would do a little mindset video, just a little selfie video, 2 to 5 minutes before selfie videos were a thing. And I did the weekly motivation every Monday for about 400 Mondays in a row. And yeah, so what happened is people who didn't play ball started finding those videos. And they would say to me, Dre, I don't play ball, so I don't watch the other stuff you put out. But when you put out that mindset stuff, that stuff applies to me. And, I'm a lawyer. I'm an accountant. Or, my son was watching your video, but I heard what you were saying. And I said, that makes sense. That makes sense. So that's what told me, hey, I could serve a bunch of people who don't even play sports. I can expand my message outside of the sports realm. And I always knew I wanted to do a bunch of things outside of sports after I was done playing. So I did. Luckily, the phone rang again. So I did keep playing. I played till 2015. But by the time I stopped playing, I was already had a little bit of a runway as far as what I was going to do business wise. And I knew exactly who I was going to serve. I was just going to take the mindset pieces from the sports world, and I was going to give them to people who did not play sports, because I realized early on that message translated pretty directly. So that's how I got into it.
Wow, Dre, that's pretty impressive, man. I applaud you for the progress and the consistency and the brand that you've developed yourself, man. That's much to be applauded, bro. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
You know, I want to peel back a little bit and go back so our listeners could understand maybe a little bit about you and where you're from and things like that. Because as you're telling me your story, man, I grew up, I'm from Jamaica, right? So we grew up on soccer and cricket and stuff like that. And I didn't get introduced to American sports like football and basketball until maybe middle school, high schoolist. And that's when I actually got into it, wanted to go play college football, a couple injuries, and that took me out of the game. So if you can, man, share with our audience, what was your journey from a childhood up to the point where you're at now that even like got you interested in basketball, a love of basketball, because obviously you're now in the business space. So something like you mentioned occurred where you had to transition to the business space, man.
Yeah, so come from the city of Philadelphia. That's where I was born and raised, now in South Florida. But was always into sports growing up. So I was always doing some kind of sports thing. So whether you're just playing in the backyard, back driveway, what we had, it wasn't a yard, it was a driveway. And this is a kickball, two-hand touch football. Someone
don't play kickball no more, I don't think. But go ahead, man.
Yeah. We're talking the early 90s here. So
yeah,
kickball, two-hand touch football. Someone had one of the little portable basketball courts with the adjustable rim. We would play on that. So those kind of sports we would play. And then eventually, as we got into our teen years, our parents would send all of us, everybody in my neighborhood, send all of us to the playground. So we go to the playground. And then there was at the playground, pretty much the same sports, but almost everybody from where I'm from, you're from the city, every young man plays basketball. So like you said, when you came to the United States, you notice everybody plays basketball. So football, you need equipment. Basketball, you need nothing. You just show up. One ball, everybody can play. So I played a little bit of baseball, wasn't really that good at baseball. I dabbled in football, but I never played seriously. I never even got around to the point of putting the equipment on. Mm-hmm. So then finally basketball around age 14 is when I got into it. And I wasn't even that good. And I just kept working on my game, kept practicing because I pretty much tried every sport that I saw was available to me or saw it as a viable option, let's just say, by that point. So basketball is what I stuck with. And I just kept practicing. And of course, since I started late, I was a late bloomer. So I didn't really start to feel like I was like good till maybe like right before I started college. Whereas most young men, they know by the time they're 14 or 15 if this is going to have a future or not because they start at age 5. But me, I was starting so late. So that's pretty much how I got into basketball. High school, only played 1 year. As I said, everybody tries out for the team. And again, if you're from the city, everybody tries out for the basketball team. And then each year you just see fewer and fewer people try out in our grade because they realized, okay, this is probably not going to happen for me, or at least they decided, let's say, it wasn't going to happen for them. So by my senior year, my last shot at making the team when I did, there were maybe 5 seniors tried out for the team. The rest of them didn't try because the rest of them said, forget it. Now, other grades, they tried out, but in my senior class, those guys who hadn't made it yet, they said pretty much forget it. Right? It's not going to be basketball. So that's how I ended up getting on the team as a senior in high school. And I sat at the bench. I tell people, Michael had a front row seat to all the games right there on the bench, watching all the games that season. But then, like I said, I didn't really start to feel like I was good, like really confident in my game till that summer after high school, but before college. And then I went to college and my game started to blossom a lot more. Luckily, I went to a small school, Division III school, where I could kind of harness that talent. And it eventually became a much better player over that next 4 years, which I needed because I wouldn't have become a pro had I not had that seasoning.
Nice. Wow, man. I could see that took some dedication, some determination, and some grit to actually push through that because, like you said, you saw the attrition of everybody else who said, like, this ain't it. I want to give up. And coming from Philadelphia around that New York area, man, I know that's like basketball mecca or something like that. So like you guys are super talented when it comes to that space, man. Let's talk about mindset and discipline because you've taken that and you've applied it into the business space. Can you talk a little bit about what is the meaning behind mindset? What is the meaning behind having discipline when it comes to employing that within the entrepreneur space?
Great question. So mindset is a compound word. It's broken up into 2 words, mind and set. So it is the way that your mind is actually set. And we all understand as humans that we operate by habit. 85% of what we do is based on habits, things that we are not even consciously aware that we're doing, but we're doing them all the time. So in order to in order to edit your mindset, let's just put it that way, and you want to change your mindset to be a different way, first thing we had to do is get conscious of the unconscious. We had to become aware of things that we're not normally thinking about. And once we're able to do that, then we can make adjustments to what's going on in what they call the subconscious mind. So when we make those adjustments, we can set it to however we want it to be, but it has to be done consciously and intentionally, which means we have to be consciously thinking about what we want our mental habits to be. And then we can, through that, we can install what we want. And you can do this through material. You can do it through books. You can do it through affirmations. You can do it through watching some motivational course. You can get coaching, whatever it is you want to do to insert into the subconscious what you want. And then through the habit of repetition, then you can install that into the subconscious. And now your habits will change based on that. Now, this is not an overnight process, but it's something that with practice and with intentionality, you can change it and you can set your mind to being the way that you want it to be. And then when you get your mindset in a certain way, now you have the being part of yourself in place, because we can't do anything unless we become the person first. So you have to be the person first, then we go do the actions. This is the part most people are aware of. This is the work, the effort, showing up every day, going to your job, going to the gym, etc., whatever you're doing. And then the end part is the having. That's the result, the outcomes, the goals, the plans being accomplished. So that 3-step process of being, doing, and having starts with the way that our mind is set. And unfortunately, the biggest tragedy here, Michael, is that many people never become aware of what I just explained. Even people who are aware, they don't often do anything with it. So their mindset is usually reflected in randomness, because they're not aware of what's going on. So they are basically victims of their circumstance, victims of their environments or whoever they happen to be around. So their mindset fluctuates based on who or what they are influenced by. And therefore their actions fluctuate, and therefore their outcomes fluctuate. So they get good, bad, up, down, random, unpredictable. And this is how most people end up living their lives, simply because they've never applied this process.
Wow. Let me peel that back a little bit. For the listener that's listening, right? And if they fall into that category and they never reach to those levels or those heights because of having the inconsistency with having a strong mindset, what are some of the things that they could start deconstructing from their lives so they could start applying? Even 1% of that, 2% of that, just keep better and getting better and better each day, man.
Excellent question. Number one thing is changing your inputs. Number one thing to change the mindset is changing the inputs. What is coming into your mind on a consistent basis? And understand that everything has an influence. So we have to be really careful about what we're allowing into our minds, especially through the habit of repetition. So hearing something one time might not change your entire life. But if you're taking certain things in over and over and over again every single day, like the music we listen to, the stuff that you read, the social media that you're scrolling, the TV shows that we watch, the movies you're paying attention to, all of that stuff is making an imprint on your subconscious. And again, the more you consume anything, that repetition, the power of repetition is like knocking on the door of somebody's house. The more you keep knocking on the door, eventually somebody's going to open the door. Right? So you keep listening to that same music, you keep watching that same TV, you keep scrolling through that same social media. Eventually, the subconscious mind is going to let that in, and that's going to start affecting the way that you think. That's going to affect the way you behave, and that's going to affect your outcomes. So the number one thing that anyone listening to this needs to do is get conscious about what you are consuming on a daily basis. It is affecting you in ways that you might not even be aware, because it's so subtle. You don't even realize that it's happening. But anything you're taking in over and over again has an effect on you.
Absolutely, man. I read that a lot through some of the John Maxwell books that I listen to when it comes to like communication and leadership and things like that. So thank you for like, even breaking that down for our listeners. I want to touch on something that obviously is what your business is about, man. When it comes to working on your game, can you elaborate more so around the framework where it's digestible for our listeners when you're working like with professionals in various fields that you are working in?
Absolutely. So these days, the work on your game framework is high levels based on 4 things: mindset, strategy, systems, and accountability. So where it started was the mindset piece, because I was just taking that from the sports world. And then once I started working with business professionals and entrepreneurs, I realized that they need more than mindset, and they need the mindset first. They still need it, but then they need some strategy. What do I actually do, especially when you're running a business? Because nobody's telling you, there's no game plan in the business. You got to create your own game plan. Whereas if you go work at a job, they tell you the plan. But when you're in a business, you figure out the plan. So the second piece is the strategy. That's the game plan of what exactly do we do. Over here, we use this thing that we call a reverse roadmap, where we basically deconstruct from your goal to the current state, and we figure out a plan based on how do we get there from here. Third piece is the system. How do we execute on the strategy over and over and over again to where the process is duplicatable and predictable. And then the last piece is the accountability. How do we make sure that the strategy is actually working? Because if you execute on the strategy and you still don't get the result, that means the strategy needs to be adjusted. And how do you make sure that the people are working? Because if the strategy is clear and it's sound, but we're still not getting the results, that means somebody's dropping the ball. Somebody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we have to check on the people and we check on the process. So that's our 4-part framework today.
Got it, man. I want to step back a little bit and ask something, because I think these two are intertwined. So consistency and discipline, I think, is intertwined, right? Yes. So when you apply like your framework, how can somebody that's working with you stay consistent? How can somebody be disciplined when they get to day 50 and they're tired or they're burnt out? Or how can somebody stay disciplined and consistent? They go on vacation, they go on their anniversary, and they got to come back and kick this back in. How do they do that?
And great question. So we have a framework here called the third day. And the third day is a sub framework underneath discipline. And the third day is all about how you show up and give your best effort when you least feel like it. So we'll just use your example here, because it doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3 days in a row. So you said day 50. Let's just say day 50. So someone decided to give me an example of something someone would be doing where they would have that feeling.
Day 50, they're at work. Boss just gave them some bad news about they're going to have some budget cuts and they may be getting laid off from the job.
Okay. And they said they're not sure yet, but they're still working as of now. Okay. So day 50 is that day when, again, you realize that this thing that you signed up for is not going to be one big party. It's not all fun and games. It's not all going to be easy, and there are going to be some challenging times. And there may be some really challenging times coming up ahead of you if you think you might be one of the victims of those budget cuts. So the third day is all about, and this is a mentality. It's not about the occurrence. It's about the mentality. It's about how you show up and perform, even on the days when you don't really feel like performing, even when you don't feel at your best. And the reason why you do this is because as a professional, the dictionary definition of professional is someone who does a thing as their main paid occupation. Now, we extend that definition. We don't contradict it, but we extend it over here at Work on Your Game and explain that a professional is also a person who shows up and delivers every single time, regardless of how they're feeling. Because if you just think about it, these definitions work together, because the only way anybody's going to pay you to do anything consistently is if you are delivering consistently. Right. So if your delivery is inconsistent, they're not going to keep paying you. If you have a pizza shop down the street and your pizza is inconsistent, the customer's not going to keep coming. Right. So you had to be consistent in the way you deliver. And as long as you're consistent in how you deliver to people, they will consistently pay you. It doesn't mean you have to be the best. You just got to be consistent. McDonald's doesn't have the best food, but they're consistent. Right. Right. You know what you're going to get. You're right. So people will pay. Right. So that's being a professional doesn't necessarily mean that you're the best. It just means that you're consistent and predictable and people know what they're going to get. So as long as people know what they're going to get from you, they will be willing to pay you. So that's what the discipline is about. And that's how you create the consistency. And the third day framework is all about how do you put the strategy and the system in place such that you can bring that energy and bring that performance even when you don't necessarily feel your best, because we can't always depend on motivation. It's great to have it. When you have motivation, it's great. We all feel amazing when we're motivated. But as a professional, we all understand there are some days that we're not motivated. Some days you just don't feel it. But you still got to do your job, right? Because it's your job. And if you don't do your job, eventually you'll be out of a job. So that's how it works.
Man, thank you for breaking that down. You are right about motivation. I recall like being in the Marine Corps, and one of the biggest things when we're like doing like physical exerting activities and things like that, motivation could only take you so far, and eventually it does run out. You know, you mentioned the third day. And I know you've written a book about it. If you can, tell our listeners a little bit more about the third day book and where they could find the book as well, too, man.
Sure. So the third day, anybody who's watching on video, I got a copy of it right here. So again, this book is all about how you show up and give your best effort when you least feel like it, on those days when you maybe don't have the energy or those moments. Because the third day could just be an hour when you got to just finish something out. It's 4 o'clock. You get off of work at 5 o'clock. You got to finish that last hour out. You're tired. How do you show up and get your best effort when you don't feel like it? That's what this book is about. And we actually give people a copy of this book for free, physical copy. All we ask is that you just cover the shipping. Just go to thirddaybook.com. Again, we'll pay for the book. We just ask you to cover the shipping, thirddaybook.com. And I got a bunch of books. So in that sales funnel, we'll offer you a bunch more books. So nobody reads just one book anyway. So you get a bunch of books. When you come into that, you come into the funnel.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for sharing that. So Dre, man, for yourself personally, you've been through a lot, right? Because I imagine being a pro basketball player, you probably had dreams of playing in the NBA and going towards like the long haul of that. Can you talk to us a little bit about what was the pivotal moment when you were facing this particular type of adversity, realizing that I need to make a career shift, I need to make a transition, and I'm either going to let the league kick me out or I'm going to make a decision on my own and step out on faith and believe in myself and do my own thing?
Do you mean as far as leaving basketball?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, well, the first thing is absolutely every young man who picks up a basketball dreams of playing for the Knicks or the Lakers, right? So that's the first option. I ended up playing overseas. The Knicks or the Lakers weren't calling. So when it came to playing overseas, it was still great. I mean, you get to travel the world, you get to make money, and you're literally playing a game for a living. So can't complain about it. It's a much easier job than being an entrepreneur. I will tell you that. But at the same time, in playing ball, the good news for me is because I faced the adversity of, as I told you, the phone wasn't ringing in 2009. I started building what became the foundation for my transition. So a lot of athletes, and I always tell people this, Michael, that if my career had gone more smoothly and I had just been steadily employed the entire time through, we might not be having this conversation today, because I would have had a whole different entree into the business world, because I would have just kept playing. And the day that I stopped playing, the next day I would have been starting at zero when it came to business. But for me, I was already 5-6 years into building the foundation of my business when I stopped playing, because I wasn't sure I was going to keep playing. I wasn't sure the phone was going to ring. It's not that I didn't want to play. It's just the opportunity was not there. And the thing about team sports, unlike entrepreneurship, is that everybody can't get in. There's a limited number of roster spots. Everybody can't play. Worldwide, you have about 4,000 to 5,000 jobs available for an American-born player to play ball professionally. And that sounds like a lot until you realize that it's like 100,000 guys who think they can play professional basketball, right? But only about 5,000 play. So for me, that transition period started when I first started making my own products. My first programs were $4.99. I was teaching basketball players how to dribble and how to shoot. Those are the first products I ever created, $4.99. But they started selling immediately because I had a ready audience and I had already invested years into building my relationship with them. Then from there, I started writing books. I started creating courses. And that was really what I was doing for those last few years that I was playing ball. Second half of my career, I was playing ball and I was selling these products online. And then you had the added revenue, brand deals and things like that from being an influencer, early days of influencing.
Right.
And then around 2014, 15, that's when I stopped playing. That's when people had told me, because they were watching the videos, they said, Dre, you sound like when I would do the motivation videos, said, Dre, you sound like a philosopher, like you sound like a college professor or a public speaker, the way that you just articulate and explain things. So I've always had a good ability to break things down and explain them, things that might otherwise be complex to some people, but I could explain it and make it simple. I've always just had that innate ability. So that's when I said, okay, well, I found out that there was an industry for public speaking, that there are people who actually get paid money to go stand on the stage and give a speech. I didn't know that was a thing. I knew people, there were speakers, but I didn't know it was people who did it like as a full-time gig. Right. So I said, let me get into that. Maybe. I didn't know how. So I said, maybe. So then I went to a Toastmasters meeting and somebody had told me about Toastmasters and they said, well, if you want to learn speaking, you should go to Toastmasters. Now I didn't need to learn speaking. I wanted to learn the business side. The Toastmasters wasn't really for that, but I'm glad I went anyway, because when I went to the first meeting, I gave a little speech. There's only about 10 people in the room. And I said, no, I used to play ball. I'm about to stop playing ball. I want to get into professional speaking. I don't know how, but somebody told me maybe I could come here and learn. And it was cool. And then after the meeting, this guy came up to me and he was the only other black guy in the room. Right. Mm-hmm. He comes up to me and he says, well, yo, I appreciate your speech. Your stuff is good. But look, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. And he told me that he was about to, or he had just had, or he's about to retire from the NFL. Okay. I actually did know when he told me his name, I knew who he was, but NFL players know they wear the helmets. So I didn't know what he looked like. When he said his name, I said, I know that name, but I didn't know his face. So he said, I'm about to go to this conference that's all about speaking. And there, like all these speakers are going to be there. So whoever I meet, I'll just pass you their information. I said, all right, cool. And the conference he was going to was the NSA, National Speakers Association conference in San Diego. So he goes, he comes back, he gives me one person's information. And I called that one person, and she actually helped me. She basically put me on. So she basically became my mentor. She told me the ropes of the game, and she explained to me, like, all right, Dre, you already got something here, right? You got some substance. You got YouTube. So you're on the internet, you have a presence. If somebody Googles you, they can find you. At this point, I had maybe 4 or 5 books written at this time. And she said, you got this work on your game thing. All you got to do, and she explained to me, if you're going to reach out to companies and you want to speak for them, you have to translate what you were telling the athletes. You got to translate it to how it applies to business. So you have to explain to them how this makes sense for business people. And that's where I came up with the discipline, confidence, mental toughness, personal initiative. And I started creating these frameworks like the third day, like we talked about. So I started creating these frameworks, and all I had to do was translate, how can I take something that works in basketball and make it work in the business world? And it wasn't actually very difficult. It was actually pretty simple for me, because again, I have the ability to break things down and explain them. So that's where I really came up with that work on your game framework. And once I started putting it out there, I'm making it sound very simple, but there's a lot of cold calling that first year or two. But once I started putting it out there and I was able to kind of get some opportunities and people heard it, the response was very positive and saying, like, this stuff is good. Like, this guy knows this stuff. And I think people liked the fact that I was coming from a different place. I wasn't a guy who just went to school, got a degree, then went into being a consultant. I went to school, played ball, got on the internet. Now I'm doing it. So it was just unique, the uniqueness of my background and where I was coming from. And again, with the speaking, I don't want people to think that this was just some thing that just happened overnight. So I spent probably the next 2-3 years. I did a whole lot of free speaking gigs, a whole lot, just to get my foot in the door. But what would happen is, and I tell entrepreneurs this all the time, especially those who I work with, I would take a free gig, do it, and then they would call me back and pay me to come back the next year. Right. And that was how I knew that the stuff was working. And my mentor, she first told me that. She said, you don't know you're good just because you finish a speech and they clap for you and people want to shake your hand. That doesn't mean anything. Right. You know you're good when you get off the stage and they ask you to come back again, or they're referring you to somebody else who will pay you money. That's how you know, because we're in the business world, right? This is business. So we got to measure the business, not the applause. So that was the mindset that I had. So I did that for like my first few years out. That's what I was focusing on, was the speaking. Then eventually just building up our own stuff, like work on your game, our coaching programs, courses, et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty much what the last almost 10 years has looked like.
Wow, man. I am so much more impressed with the story. I knew a good bit about your story, but to hear the groundwork that you was putting in. I work with Anthony Trucks, and he's telling me some of the same things that you're talking about too, man. Some of the groundwork that you had to do. And it's important when it comes to the connections, the networking, and willing to bet on yourself and willing to try something, even if you fail at it. I love that mindset. I want to touch on something before I transition here to some of the business aspects of things. If you could talk a little bit to our audience, man, how did you cultivate a mindset of resilience, mental toughness? Because you could have easily given up. You could have easily quit or different things, right? How did you come up with that? And then if you could share that with our audience, for the audience, the listeners that's listening, that are probably in a tough place right now, struggling, and through your level of perseverance, can you share some things from that, man?
Absolutely. So I think a little bit of it is just my internal wiring. I've always been a competitive person, so it was great that sports were presented to me. And I use sports as a vehicle. So a little bit of it is personal wiring, but a lot of it is just conditioning. So as we talked about with the subconscious mind, is the material that you're taking in. So luckily for me, growing up, I had 2 parents at home. My mother is an educator, and she was always so she was big into making sure my sister and I were reading and writing from a very young age. So we kind of had a cheat code because we had a teacher in the house, right? So I was always reading books, always been into reading. That's why I got into writing, and I still write every day to this very day. And anybody get on my email list, you'll see. So the books, a lot of the books that I took in, once I got introduced to what we now know as personal development, I didn't even know that was a thing. That happened because I got invited to a network marketing meeting. I'm going to connect all this to what you're asking. I got invited to a network marketing meeting when I was in college. It was just make some extra money, et cetera. And I didn't stay in network marketing, but I went to a couple of the meetings, and they are the ones who were saying, if you're going to build a business, you got to build up yourself. So that's when I started reading more stuff like Jim Rohn and Brian Tracy and Napoleon Hill and these guys and Tony Robbins. And these guys were all talking about just ways that you can alter your thinking on purpose to make yourself a better and more valuable individual. And I said, okay, there's a whole world of people who do this. And again, I'm like 21 years old. Nobody ever told me that. And I'm in college. Nobody was talking about this stuff. So I'm like, I had to go here to find that out. So that's where I got introduced to that. And then being even a little bit of sales experience that I had even before I got into basketball is that a lot of times when you're in sales, people are telling you no. Right? Most salespeople's closing ratio is less than 50%. Which means most of the time when you make an offer, somebody says no. So you're getting told no more times you're getting told yes. And I remember being at the network marketing meeting, and they said, well, if a baseball player gets on base 3 times out of 10, he goes to the Hall of Fame, right? They call that hitting 300. So 3 out of 10 puts you in the Hall of Fame. So understand that you don't need everybody to say yes. You just need to move on to the next one. They would say, some will, some won't. So what next? Right? Someone's waiting. Go on, move on to the next one. So that was instilled in me because when they said it, it made perfect sense to me immediately. That made sense to me. Then with basketball, I mean, just the fact before I even got into the pros, how many times I tried out for a team and did not make the team. I got cut from more teams than I made. All right, leading up to my pro career. But again, it's only the ones that you make that people remember. Right? As long as you keep going, they only remember the successes. And I wrote an article about that, how to render your failures insignificant. And the way you render your failures insignificant is to create as long as you keep going. So if the last thing that happens to you was a failure and you stop, well, that's what we call putting a period at the end of the sentence. But if you put a comma instead of a period, that means there's more to the thought. You're not complete. You're not finished. And as long as the last thing that you did was a success, or you have more successes than failures, then people tend to notice the successes and they forget about the failures. Those are the only things they pay attention to. So I always had that in my mind just through this confluence of personal development, the sales experience, the network marketing experience, and then the failures that I had in basketball. But I wasn't going to let the getting cut from the team be the last thing that happened. I said, let me go try out for another team. Let me at least make the last team that I play for, whichever one is going to be. And then you were asking about the resilience. This is, man, I would say is probably the most important asset because discipline, consistency, resilience, they're all kind of like the same thing.
Yeah.
It's number one asset in terms of everything that I've done, whether we're talking on the court, off the court, everywhere in between is that resilience. Can you keep going in the face of disappointment, failure, frustration, setback, things not going the way that you want them to go? That is 100% the number one thing, because what I tell people is that everybody in life, Michael, goes through stuff. Everybody goes through stuff. There's no one who is exempt from it. The most successful person you know, the least successful person you know, everybody's going through stuff. The difference is, and at the same time, since everybody's going through stuff, guess what? Everyone has a story. Everyone on the planet has a story. Everybody listening to this has a story, and most people want to share their story. The challenge is not everybody gets to share their story because not everyone has an audience who wants to hear your story. Now, what makes people want to hear your story? What makes people want to hear your story is that you kept going and you saw it through to success. Once you get to success, because what happens is a success gets people's respect and attention. Now they're willing to listen to you because you're successful, however you define that. And because you're successful, now you have an audience. Now you can tell your story. You can talk about yourself. But if you have not yet created the success that gets people's respect and attention, they don't want to hear your story, even though you have one. So the key is, if anybody out there who wants to share their story and you want to put your word, your thoughts or your ideas or your views, whatever out there, you must create the success that will cause people to stop and say, damn, who's that? Let me find out what this person did. Let me find out what they've been through. Let me see what they're saying. And then once you get up on that stage and you're the one that everybody's looking at and you're under the lights, yes, your success is what makes them look up to you. But when you tell your story, it allows them to relate to you because everybody goes through stuff. So if you just get on the stage and only talk about your wins, you don't relate to anybody because nobody knows what it feels like to always win. Right? Everyone's failed before. Everyone's been in a losing situation. Right? So that's when you get to relate to your audience by telling them, hey, I have been down too, but let me tell you how I got from down here to up here. that's when you get people to relate to you and connect to you. But you have to have the success if you want to tell your story. So that resilience is a huge part of my story, and is why those principles, discipline, confidence, mental toughness, taking initiative, that's why they're the foundations of what I do, because no matter where a person is in their journey, when they hear those things, it can activate them to get from where they are to where they want to go. And then they can see me as an example. Okay, he used them and it worked for him. I can use them and it can work for me.
Wow, man, I love that. I always write down in my notepad, how do I activate the resilient mindset? And that's what you just kicked in. But then you took it a step forward, which I'm going to ask you about here, is you became a person of interest. And being someone, a person of interest, can you talk a little bit about, I know one of your mentors, you said, gave you the blueprint of what you need to do in regards to steps of getting into public speaking. Right. Can you share with our audience your journey and your story into speaking, getting on stage to the point of doing keynote speeches to doing TEDx? Because there is a fear out there for people, for our business owners, to get in front of people and speaking, having that level of confidence, how to convey a story and connect with people. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey, about your story, and what does someone need in regards to communicate with an audience to the level where you've gotten to of giving speeches and keynotes?
Absolutely. Great question. So number one thing is that when we want to talk about future-proof skills, and this is something that I talk to my audiences about all the time, there are several future-proof skills that no matter what kind of AI, technology, apps, whatever come around, these skills will always make you a valuable person. Number one is your ability to sell. Can you influence and persuade other people to do something that maybe they otherwise would not have done? Number two is just general communication skills. Can you get on a show like this one and sit with a host and let them throw questions at you, and can you answer them in a way that you sound like you know what you're talking about? Number three is your ability to speak in public. Whether that means in public, when I say public speaking, I mean speaking to two or more people at the same time. It could be 1,000, it could be two, but can you just speak in public without falling apart? Right? Can you speak in public? That is always going to be a skill, because so many people are afraid of speaking in public. And one way you get better at speaking in public is just, first of all, practicing speaking in private. When you know your stuff, then you're not nervous about speaking in public. I'm excited to speak in public because I'm excited because they need to hear what I'm about to say.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's switching your mindset. Instead of looking at it as a fearful thing, look at it as an exciting thing, because anxiety and anticipation are the exact same energy. It's just with different labels on it. So anyway, to answer your question here, when it came to getting into the professional speaking, because the public speaking is you speak and people hear you. Professionals when they pay you, right? So I wanted to get paid, right? So my mentor, her name is Donna St. Louis, and she told me, the first thing she told me is that you got to have a framework. You got to basically make sense of this. And a framework is simply an apparatus that takes whatever it is that you're trying to communicate and it puts it into a neat package that makes it easy for people to understand. So work on your game itself is a framework, because in that framework, I'm telling you 1, 2, 3, 4. The third day is a framework, right? So a framework is just, I mean, if somebody builds a house, there's a framework. There's a frame to the house, right? And inside the house, you have the bathroom, you got the living room, you got the kitchen. All right, so there's a frame. All it does is holds everything. A picture goes in a frame. So you got to have a framework of what you're doing. And at that point, I already had it wasn't perfect, but I had a pretty good framework of what I was going to teach. Because again, when you reach out to someone, first thing they're going to ask you is, let's say you call somebody, you get them on the phone, like somebody who makes a decision about hiring speakers. First thing they want to know is, all right, who are you and what do you speak about and why are you qualified to speak about it? Those are 3 things they want to know. Right. So I'm Dre Baldwin. I'm a former athlete. You try to use that to get some attention. Here's what I speak about. It's called Work on Your Game. And what does this have to do with our audience? That's what they want to know. How does this relate to why would my audience care about what you have to say? And then you got to tell them, why does this matter? All right. So I know you got to know who your audiences are. Who are the type of people who would benefit from this type of conversation? So in my space, I'm coming from the athletic world. In the athletic world, what do? We compete. We win games, we lose games. We got to show up every single day. Sometimes it's hard. We still got to do our jobs. We need to be activated. And sometimes when we're not activated, we got to get activated. So who needs that? Well, sales world needs that. So that gives you a whole bunch of people, insurance people, sales people, any kind of organization that does any kind of selling. Everybody sells. You just got to find a sales department. So I knew exactly who I wanted to target. And then use and then leverage what you have. So what is it? So some speakers, they can get on because they're women speakers and you want to have women. And some speakers get on because they're athletes and want to have athletes. Somebody because you worked in that industry. So the industry type speakers, you sold insurance for 20 years, you could speak at insurance conferences. So you just got to figure out who would be interested in what you're offering, because everything ain't for everybody. Right? You could be the best speaker in the world. Not every audience wants you. Right? It's just, you got to find your right. You got to get in where you fit in, as they say. So once I wanted to get in the game, so getting actually on the stage, because this is the other part that you asked. I remember I was listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast. This is about 2014. He had this guy on there named Derek Sivers, and Derek is an author and speaker himself. And Derek was saying, they did this, anybody knows Tim Ferriss podcast, he does these long interviews, like 2-3 hours. So interviews ending, and he said, Derek, where can people find you, et cetera? And Derek says, well, you can email me. And Tim said, you sure you want to say that? Because I got a lot of listeners and people will email. You're going to get 1,000 emails. And Derek said, that's all right. I'll read every single one of them and I will respond to every single email. Might take me a while, but I'll respond. So I emailed them after I listened to that. I emailed them and I said, well, look, here's who I am. Again, same thing. I used to play ball. I'm about to stop playing ball. I want to get into professional speaking. What are some ways you think I can get in the game? And he responded. And he said, you might want to try doing a TED Talk. He said, all you got to do is go to the TED website, go put in where you live and see if you can find any events in your area. And I did exactly what he said. And that's how I got my first TED Talk. I just went to apply for it. I found it. I'm in Miami, so I looked for TED Talks around here. And there was one in Broward High School, whatever it's called, West Broward High School. And that's where I did my first TED Talk. And my second one was in Coconut Grove. And then I did a couple others outside of Florida. But that's how I got on. And I want to make sure I'm giving people the whole game here. Because, again, a lot of times when people like myself, yourself, Michael, we get on our platforms, we talk about stuff, we make it seem like this was just overnight. We snapped our fingers and everything worked. I have done 4 TEDx talks. I've applied for about 40. Okay. So I want people to understand that. My success rate is about 10%. So not every time I tried to get on the stage did I get on the stage. I made more cold calls than I booked speaking gigs. The number of stages I've been on is a small percentage of the number of calls that I made. All right. So I want people to understand that. And it's important, though. It's important, Michael, that people understand that, because I don't want somebody to get off of listening to this. Then they start calling and trying to get on stages. And a couple of people say no. And they're like, oh, I guess I'm not as good as Dre. No, you're probably better than me. All right. Because now you got somebody giving you the game. Nobody gave me this when I was just trying to figure it out. So understand, not everybody is going to say yes to you. Not everybody's going to buy your stuff. It doesn't matter what you're selling. You can sell it for $2. Not everybody's going to buy it. Let alone you selling it for $20,000. Not everybody's going to buy what you're selling, but you just got to stay in the game. So, which is why I'm glad you asked me about resilience before we talked about this, because you need it. And once you get on, and I already know, I know myself, when I get on the stage, I don't care if I got to speak for free. And I've spoken at conferences for free where I went and applied. They never heard of me. I just found it somewhere on Google. I go apply. They say, all right, we'll bring you in to speak. They put me in like one of the breakout rooms. So it's the new guy room. All right. They put me in there. I speak, and the reviews are so good that they call me and say, all right, we'll bring you back next year. We want you to be the keynote and we'll pay you this time. Whereas the first time, they didn't pay for my flight. They didn't pay for my hotel. They didn't pay for my food. They weren't sure I was any good. Like, I invested in that. We're talking, when you go to speak at an event, a flight, what are you talking? $600-700. Hotels another $300-400. The food is another couple $100, and the money that you're not making because you're at home. We're talking $2,000-3,000 investments that I made into myself, and then I get paid on the back end, and that's after making 20-30 reach outs to get one person to say yes. All right, so I want people to understand this. This is very important that you get this so you have the proper expectations. But as long as you have game, and again, this is from the sports world, as long as you got game, I already know when I get on, they're going to see. All I got to do is get on the stage. As long as I get on the stage, same thing in basketball. As long as I can get on the court, we're going to see. But my job is to get on the court, and then we're going to see what it is. But you just got to have the right expectations, the proper mindset, and you must be good. That is one of the mandates here, is you got to actually have some game. And I tell this to athletes, and I'll wrap up my answer with this. I always told this to athletes, and I tell the entrepreneurs to this day. We are in a performance and a results-based business. You must perform and you must produce results. No amount of opinion, no amount of friendships, family, whatever, can overcome the fact that you did not perform or you do not produce results. If you perform and produce results, nobody has to like you. But when you get up there, they ain't got no choice because it's obvious. All right, in the sports world, we got the scoreboard. Business is a little bit trickier. But when you produce results and perform, then you'll always have an opportunity.
Absolutely. Man, Dre, I co-sign everything that you just said. I recall applying for I was in a call 3 weeks ago, and I was telling this young lady that I'm booked to do about 2 keynotes per month this year in 2024.
Right.
And she was like, how did you get that? How did that happen? So I told her, I said, for about a year and a half, I spoke for free here in Florida or across
That's
wherever.
right.
And on top of that, me and my team, myself personally, we're applying to speaking gigs about 20 to 30 a day.
Exactly.
20 to
Right.
30 a
Give
day.
people the math. 20 or 30 a day over what? 20 work days a month.
Yeah.
That's like 600 applications to book two stages. Right. Just do the math. Right.
So to get to this particular point, it took a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of things just to get to your dream, your vision, and actually
Right.
seeing it come to fruition, man. So I applaud you, man, for sticking with it, going through the grind, and knowing your value. I think is so key and so important, because that's why you're excited about it when you're getting up on stage, when you're talking about the product and the service that you're delivering, man. I think that's so key and so important. So for the listeners that's listening, man, listen to Dre. Just keep on going, just keep on pushing, because through his adversity, you saw the resilience built up through him as well. Dre, as a business owner, I think one of the most important things being in the space that you're in is leadership development. And I would like for you to share with our audience your path, your leadership development that got you to be the leader that you are now today. And if you could share with our audience as well, what does that look like in the business space in regards to like the people that you're working with, the companies that you're working with, the teams that you're building, in regards to how important leadership development is?
Great question. So one of the things that when I was transitioning from sports to business, and I was talking to my mentor, she talked about, you being an athlete is a great asset in the speaking world, because there are certain traits that athletes have, like the motivation, the performance mandate, the producing results, the having to show up every day. And she also said leadership, because when you play a team sport, you have to, first of all, you got this dynamic of the team. You got to work with all these different types of personalities all the time, which is what a salesperson has to do, or anybody in corporate. You got to respect the people above you and the people below you and the people who are parallel to you. And also when you're in team sports, you deal with different types of leaders. You deal with different coaches. You got good ones, you got bad ones. So you learn what works and what doesn't as a leader. So the first thing I'll say when it comes to leadership for everyone is that there's no one right way to lead, because you have to deal with different personalities. You can't talk to everybody the same way. And trust me, as a team sport athlete, I dealt with coaches who did it the right way and did it the wrong way. All right, I've had coaches who were really good at knowing the right buttons to push with the right players. I've seen coaches in college and in the pros make players cry in the locker room in the middle of the game with the way they were talking to them, because they didn't know which buttons to push with the right people. Like, you can yell at him, you can't yell at him. All right, you yell at that guy, now we lost him. Like, that guy you can yell at, doesn't matter. And they didn't understand that, right? So the leadership thing, there's no right or wrong way. It's a very intangible thing, is what they call fingertip feel. You have to develop that feel and be able to read people. This is a communication skill. So the thing about communication, Michael, is a lot of people, when they think communication, they think talking, right? Standing on the stage, giving a speech, turning on the mic, being on social media. But half of communication is listening, is what you're absorbing. Are you listening to what everybody else has to say? Are you noticing what they're not saying? You notice how they're saying it. You got to pick up on all of it. All of that is part of leadership. So it's developing your style of leadership, because I would guarantee your style of leadership, Michael, is different than my style. Right? I got a certain way of communicating. You have a certain way. And my way will work perfect with one room of people, but not so well in the way with yours. Like, you can go in a different room and yours is perfect, but if I came in there, it wouldn't work. Right. So you got to find, first of all, get in where you fit in, find your right audience. And then you have to make your adjustments, because sometimes you have to adjust. You can't deal with everyone the same way. Again, you can't yell at everybody in the room. There's some people you can yell at and they're happy. Some people you yell at and they'll leave, they'll quit. Right. So you got to know that. So when it comes to that leadership development, the best way to get it is through experience of dealing with different people. The good thing about playing sports is that you're always dealing with a bunch of different people all the time. All right, especially in team sports. And I played basketball. It's 12 other guys on the team. You play football, you're dealing with 60 other personalities every single day. All right, and different coaches, and not to mention the opponents. right? So the good thing about sports is that you get a lot of life experience just dealing with human beings and personalities, and everybody's competing, right? And everybody's trying to beat everybody. So it's a very rich experience you get. And same thing that you get in business. The more experience you get, the better you get, you know? So I know this for myself personally. I look back 10 years ago, I thought I was so smart. And I'm like, man, I didn't know nothing 10 years ago. And you probably had the same experience. Like the more you experience, the more you learn, right? But at the same time, we want to take advantage of it while we're in it. And what was the rest of the question here? I want to make sure I'm not going too far off.
Yeah, if you could expand a little bit when it comes to leadership development, how important is it for someone in business, right? So as a business owner, how important is it to lead your team as a business owner?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's super important. So me right now, my team is I have one assistant who I work with directly. I talk to her every day, and I have an audio team who handles a lot of the media stuff that we put out. So when it comes to leadership on your team, and I'm glad you brought that up. With a lot of entrepreneurs, they tend to get lazy. Entrepreneurs get lazy in that they believe that when they hire a team, that means that they can be hands off and now they don't have to do any more work. When on the contrary, when you hire a team, you now actually have to do more work because now you have to invest in them. You got to invest in your people. Right. And I have made mistakes. This is not my first assistant. I've had multiple assistants, and there are sometimes I've hired an assistant. I hired the wrong person because I was just rushing. I lost one person. I wanted to get another person in there so quick that I didn't follow my process properly, didn't train them properly, and I ended up having to fire them. And it wasn't even their fault. It was my fault because I shouldn't have hired them in the first place. Right. Now, when it comes to my current assistant, this is an investment. Every single day, we're on a call. Every day, we have a call for at least 30 minutes. And I want to know, what were your challenges yesterday? What are you working on today? What can I help you with at work? What can I help you with? Even if it's something outside of work. And she always brings up something. And I will help her with that. The point is the investment, because as my team member I'm talking about now, she's an executive assistant. So her job is to make my job easier, which means she has to download pretty much my entire thought process. I have to invest in her so she can understand it. Mm-hmm. So I don't just tell her what to do. I tell her why to do it. Mm-hmm. And I got to take the time to invest in her. And she's going to become, she's light years better now than she was when I first hired her. I hired her, she's probably been here 8 months. I'll tell you, one of my first executive assistants I had back maybe 3-4 years ago. When I hired her, she had never been an executive assistant before, Michael. I made her so good that she got hired away from by another company for triple what I was paying her.
Wow.
That's how good I made her to where she quit for more money. because I had invested in her. I was talking to her for like an hour to hour and a half every day and teaching her not only what to do, but why to do it. So her level goes up. So if you just tell people what to do, they're robots. You tell them why to do it. Now they get the knowledge. Mm-hmm. And now they know something that they didn't know before. But you got to make that investment in your team so that they understand that them working for you is not just a paycheck. It's also their personal development as an individual, that I'm getting better by working here. So leaving here, they're going to lose something, not just a check. They're going to lose this investment because your next boss ain't going to do that, because that company that hired her away, they went out of business in 90 days. And then you know what she did? She started a business doing what I had taught her how to do. We're still cool to this day. I'm not mad at her. I mean, I gave her the knowledge, but she went and started a business helping other entrepreneurs basically network and get their names out there and build relationships. I taught her how to do that because I showed her how I thought, and now she has the knowledge, and now she teaches other people. But anyway, the whole point here is when you want to lead, you got to invest in people, and people have to feel like you give a damn about them. And any leaders who I've dealt with, if we've ever talked about this, they say that. They say the reason that these kids or these players or my team respects me is because they know that I care about them, that I'm not just using them for the job or for the sport or for the game. And any leaders who didn't do too well with their people and their people don't remember them fondly is the opposite. I feel like they're using me, right? They're just using me for the job. They don't really see me for me. They just see me as a cog in the machine. And people can feel that. And the last piece I'll give you here, the intangible to this, Michael, is that you can't tell other people how to feel. So you can only do the best that you can do, and you got to read how they're feeling. Do they feel like you care about them? Because if they don't feel like you care about them, it doesn't matter if you think you do, it's still not getting across. They have to feel like you care about them. And if they feel like you care about them, now you're doing a good job of leading. But if they don't, then you're not doing a good job. And here's a good way to solve it. Talk to them, ask them, and they'll tell you exactly what they need.
Right. Invest in your people. You'll see how much you get. Maximum
That's
results,
right.
maximum performance out from the outcome of that, man.
That's right.
You know, I love what you just said about your previous employee that went on and then eventually left the other company and then went on to do our own thing, because it's a testament and speaks to your systems and processes and the way you teach people and break it down for them to understand that. For our people that's listening to this podcast and they want to get into entrepreneurship, or they're already an entrepreneur and they may be like cracks in their processes and systems like that, can you talk a little bit about having a good process, having a good system as a business owner in regards to like having things work seamlessly and understanding where you need to automate, delegate, and allocate funds in different ways and things like that?
Yeah. So the system is everything, because the system is the only way you can ever get out of your business. So for any business owner, the only way you personally as the owner can ever extract yourself from the business, extricate yourself from the business, is you have to have systems in place that can do what you were doing yourself. Because if you don't have systems, that means you always have to be there. You always have to do the stuff. So I even wrote out a master plan, because I can't even remember where I got the idea, but man, somebody had written this idea. They were talking about how I read how a lot of thought leaders, like authors, speakers, coaches, they would, when they pass away, that their businesses pretty much go to zero very quickly, because the main guy is not around anymore to do the promotion, and they didn't have a system in place to still sell the stuff without the main guy around. So when the main guy dies, there's nothing to do with the stuff. Even though their stuff was great, their books are out there, people were quoting them and their videos are on YouTube, but there's no way to sell their stuff because they didn't have a system. So I started writing out a plan. Like, all right, if I was to die tomorrow, could my son and my wife take all my stuff and still sell it? I started writing that out. I made a Google Doc and I'm always updating it. Like, all right, here's how you sell this. Here's what you do with this. Take this free stuff, do it like this, put it into a course, put it out here, over here. Here's how you run the ads. And writing all that stuff out as if I was teaching somebody else how to be me without me being there. Right. And that's the system. And the more that you're willing to do, and this is work, it takes effort. This is the delegation, but there's another word I'm looking for here, but just your way of breaking down every single thing that you do, and you have to put it into words. You have to documenting everything. So at our company, at Work on Your Game, I have a video, standard operating procedures, not a video, folder in Google Drive, but all our standard operating procedures. It's got about 100 videos in it. So every time I'm talking to my assistant, like yesterday, we were having a conversation, we were going through the CRM, and I was explaining to her how we go back through speaking leads, for example, and how we update them. Like, this lead was from 2021. We haven't checked on them. Here's what you do. Here's how you fix it. Here's what you look for when you go to their website. Don't be reading all the website. We need to look for this, this, and this. All right. Don't waste time reading through their stuff. Like, because we need to get through all of these leads. So I got 137 we got to update. Right. And I explained that to her. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the video from this conversation. I'm going to put it in the SOPs folder. So it's here. So next person who comes in behind you, they will know exactly what to do. So it's documenting everything. That the more stuff you have documented and explained, not only the what, but the why, now you're creating insurance for yourself, because now you could tell your kids or your assistant, or if you want to sell your business, maybe one day, you have the documentation of what happens, why it happens, and how it happens. This is how Starbucks, McDonald's, all these companies that franchise, the reason they can franchise is not because their product is so amazing necessarily, is because they have documented what's supposed to happen, how it's supposed to happen, and they don't let you digress from the plan. And I remember I was telling people that a lot of people don't believe Hamburger University is a real thing.
It is. I saw it myself.
Right. Hamburger University, that's a real thing. If you get into a McDonald's franchise, they bring you to their university and they tell you how to run their McDonald's, and you must follow their process or they'll kick you out.
Yeah.
So you can't mess it up. That's the whole point. That's the documentation. McDonald's has every single thing you could possibly do in that store documented. So I worked at McDonald's as a senior in high school. This is the last thing. And I remember the manager, she had on a polo shirt and it said Hamburger University. I thought it was a joke. I was like, they just call it that because you're a manager. And no, that was a real thing. She had this big binder. You wouldn't think McDonald's has so many processes, right? She had this big binder with all these pages in it, and they're telling you exactly what to do and how to do it.
Wow. Interesting. So for our listeners that's listening, what Dre is saying is you ultimately need to have an SOP. And the importance behind that is I went to Chicago at Rush University, and I actually saw, me and my wife was there actually, and we saw Hamburger University. And we just like you did, bro. We was like, are they serious?
Yeah.
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Hamburger University is a real thing. But I wanted to expand a little bit because as a business owner, I never really gained the concept so much when I first got into entrepreneurship. And then I took a step back and I was like, hold on, I served in the Marine Corps, and where all of the service members are interchangeable. If you think about it, as people retire, people leave, somebody comes in, and the process repeats itself. Then I said, all right, cool. I see that this repeats itself. Then a couple of years ago, I bought a franchise, kind of like what you're saying about McDonald's. And I bought a franchise down here in South Florida. And I came in and it was plug and play. And I realized having systems and processes and SOPs make the transition and make your business run so much smoother. But it also helps, like what you just mentioned, man. If there's an exit strategy, if you pass away or something like that, the legacy can continue and keep going, man. So you're so right when you say that, man. Having those things in place, man, is essential as a business owner.
100%. And that the franchise model, you have to get everything documented. And I was talking to a guy last week who we're going to get into our program. He has a health business, biohacking health business, and they're looking to start franchising like this year, like the next few months. He's like, we're getting everything documented, and I got to get this department up to speed. We got to document every single thing that we do, every question, every answer, every little I dotted and T cross has to be documented, because that's the only way you can pass it on to someone else. You got to get all the knowledge out of your head so that the business is no longer based on you, it's based on the system. And the challenge for entrepreneurs is that some people are just too lazy to do the documentation. But once you understand how to do it and you understand the value of it, then it's worth the investment, because you only got to do it one time as long as it's done properly.
That's true.
Yeah.
Dre, man, before we wrap up and get out of here, man, you're an author that's written over 33 books. That's a lot of books, man, that you've accomplished.
Got a system for writing books. Yeah.
Can you share with our audience, man, where did you get the desire and the tutelage just to say, hey, I'm going to invest in myself, personal development? And then can you talk a little bit about, like, we don't need to talk about all of the books, but kind of talk about like what inspired you to write a book. And then if you could talk a little bit about the books that you've written and why was writing so many books so important to you?
Sure. So I'll reiterate, got to give credit to my parents. My mother's an educator, so I was always into reading from a very young age. That led me into writing. I first found out that you could write. I always knew I wanted to write a book, but my belief was, based on what it was, which was to write a book, you had to go through these gatekeepers and you got to get with a publisher and an agent, and someone has to approve of you, and then you can write a book. So I wasn't really pursuing that. I said, maybe one day if I decide to put the effort into trying to sell myself to a publisher, I'll go write a book. But then self-publishing became a thing. You can write your own book. So I wrote my first book. The only book of all of mine that's a story book with me just telling a story is my first book. It's called Buy a Game. And it's just all about my story from when I started playing till up through college. And I put that book out for free in like 2010. And I missed out on probably about 50,000 email subscribers because I didn't have an email list at the time. So that was my first book. And then I wrote a couple more about those work on your game philosophy, discipline, confidence, mental toughness, personal initiative, just to establish the mindset piece. Wrote some books on how to play basketball overseas, some guidebooks and like how-to books on those things. And all of my books are some type of personal and professional development. And the reason why books matter so much, Michael, is because books have staying power. They're sticky. They have a long tail as opposed to content. It's funny because I got videos on YouTube and I would get people reaching out to me and say, Dre, do you have a video on ABC? And I would send them a link to the video and they would say, well, Dre, this video is old. The video came out like 3 months ago. Can you make a new one? And I'm like, well, if I made a new one, I would say the exact same thing I said in the old one. They said, yeah, cool, but can you make a new one? Content, it has a very short shelf life, right? People forget about it, even though there's a lot of value in older content, but people don't see it that way. But a book, someone puts out a book that came out 8 years ago. Nobody even asked, when did it come out? It's just new. A book is just new to you no matter when you come across it. Whereas content, it matters when it came out. First thing people look at is the date. So that's the good thing about books, is that they have staying power. I mean, all of us, we're still reading books from hundreds of years ago, right? People who are not even alive anymore. They weren't alive when we were born, but we're still reading their books. So books just last a lot longer. And I've always been a firm believer, and not even a believer, I've noticed it's true, that the written word just has more authority and credibility than the spoken word. It's just what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If someone says something on a YouTube video, it doesn't have as much authority as if you write it down.
Mm-hmm.
All the most important text out there is written down. The Constitution is written down. Laws are written down. The Bible is written down. Every religious text is written down on paper. You graduate from school, you get documentation. If they want to, the IRS comes after you, they send it to you on paper. It's not a YouTube video. They don't call you. It's on paper. All right. Everything that's important is written down on paper. And until it's written down on paper, we don't believe it. Contracts are on paper. So if you really think about it, all the most important communication in the world has to be written down on paper, or we don't believe it. The talk is cheap, as they say, but the written word, we believe that when we see it. So as they say, we believe it when we see it. So that's why the book matters so much, and it will always matter.
That's a fact, man. As a business owner, what is your approach to personal branding and establishing a unique identity so you could be competitive in this business space?
Oh, that's everything, because the brand is the space that you occupy in the minds of the market. So when someone thinks work on your game, they have no choice but to think about me. Or if you Google it, you ain't going to see nobody but me. Right. And if you see me, you're going to see work on your game. So your brand is all about what is the space that you occupy in the minds of the consumer, whether it's someone who's already in your world or someone who might one day be in your world. So establishing that brand matters a lot, and you want to continue to establish that brand. You want to keep pounding the fact that you're this person, or your company is about this, or you are about whatever, so that people understand it and they create that association in their mind. So anytime you come up, that thing comes up, or when that thing comes up, you come up. So what do you want your brand to be? That's super important for everybody. And you don't even have to be a business owner. That can apply. You could be working in a corporate job, Fortune 500 company. You have a brand as well, because what's your reputation? That's all your brand is, just your reputation amongst people. So reputation does matter. And as they say, guard it with your life.
And we get ready to wrap up here, Dre. What do you want the legacy of working on your game? What do you want your legacy to be for Dre Baldwin whenever it's all said and done for your company and for your brand, man?
I want work on your game to be the just do it of personal and professional development. So when you say just do it, everybody knows who that is and you know what it's about. All right. So when we say work on your game, someone says work on your game, I want everybody to know what that means. And people can get it. I mean, the saying says everything it needs to say. I don't want people to make that synonymous with any type of personal development, any type of professional development. So that's our aim right now.
And thank you for that, Dre. Well, thank you for coming on and being a guest, Dre. How can listeners that's listening to your story and to your message find you, man?
Sure. So you can find me on every social media platform. I'm probably most active on Instagram. Instagram is just my name, at Dre Baldwin, all one word. We already told you about the book, The Third Day. You get your free copy by going to thirddaybook.com. And of course, at Work on Your Game, we have a whole lot of going on, our university, our coaching, and all of that. But I don't want to give people too much. Once you go get the book, you're going to be on my email list, and we're going to tell you everything you need to know once you get there. So just go to thirddaybook.com, get your free copy of that book. We'll get that book shipped out to you, and then we'll be in your inbox, and you'll know everything you need to know about us.
Absolutely. Dre, for our listeners that's listening, what are some key takeaway lessons from your life, from your story, and from your journey that they could take and have an impact into their lives today, man?
Great question. So number one is that discipline is the most important asset, most important attribute for anyone who wants to be successful, because there are plenty of talented people out here, plenty of people with resources, potential, and opportunity that do not make the most of it simply because they don't have the discipline to put it to work as necessary. And it's not putting it to work when you feel like it, but putting it to work even when you don't feel like it. That consistency matters, because that consistency creates a habit in the minds of the other people. So this all this stuff connects. You want to build a brand, you got to be consistent with what you do so that people come to recognize you and that thing synonymously. That's discipline, consistency, that resilience of continuing to show up, even when you don't feel like showing up, even when things are not working, even when everything and everyone is telling you that you should give it up. Having the resilience to keep going, that matters a ton, because there are plenty of talented people who wasted their opportunity and take their talent to the graveyard simply because they didn't have the resilience to keep going when things got tough. And then always remembering that we are in a performance and results-based business. In life, if you can perform and you can produce results, you can write your own ticket, you can name your price, you can tell the world what they have to give you, and they will give it to you because they know what they're going to get from you. So you notice it all comes back to that same thing, discipline, doing it over and over again.
Dre, man, you reached out to me and you got my attention. You got more of my attention today from hearing your story and all the things that you've accomplished, man. I am truly enamored by all the things that you're doing, the lives that you're blessing, man. Thank you so much for coming on and being a guest on the show today, man.
Thank you for having me on, Michael. I'm glad we got your attention then, and I appreciate you sharing your platform, man. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Until next time, guys, continue working on your game, and God bless.
Ain't complain at all. Couple dollars in my pocket, no income and go. Been working on my body, getting healthier. Thank God for clarity.